David Ray Griffin is a theologian and philosopher of international reputation. For much of his career, he taught at the Claremont School of Theology and the Claremont Graduate University, where in 1973 he co-founded with John B. Cobb the Center for Process Studies, a research center in the Claremont School of Theology. In 1983, he founded the Center for a Postmodern World in Santa Barbara, and from 1987 until his retirement in 2004, he was the editor of a major series of scholarly monographs, the SUNY, State University of New York, series in constructive postmodern philosophy. He is himself the author, co-author, or editor of more than 24 books on philosophical and theological subjects. Since 2004, Professor Griffin has written a further 9 books assessing different aspects of the evidence relating to the events of September 11, 2001, and has co-authored or co-edited 2 other books on 9/11 issues. These books, together with his many public lectures and media appearances, have had a major international impact, helping to foster a growing awareness of the crimes and deceptions of 9/11. In 2008, his book, The New Pearl Harbor Revisited, was named a Publisher's Weekly Pick of the Week. In 2009, The New Statesman named him one of the 50 people who matter today. He has been nominated twice for a Nobel Peace Prize, a prize that I would suggest he is unlikely ever to receive, not having started any wars or ordered programs of covert assassination or anything of the like. That is to say, that we know of. We're not. David Ray Griffin's most recent book, 9/11, 10 Years Later, When State Crimes Against Democracy Succeed, was published 2 days ago on September 6, 2011. He tells me that he is hoping to see a copy of his book before these hearings are over. In this new book, as Peter Dale Scott has remarked, Griffin, quote, shows how over a decade the events of 9/11 and the reports on them have been used to attack the American democratic system. Above all, he documents the success of this attack by the refusal of the media, the academy, and religious institutions to openly discuss these matters, and by the number of critics who at one extreme have made fools of themselves in echoing the Orwellian official version, and at the other extreme have either been fired or silenced after their dissent from it, end of quote. In 2005, Professor Griffin published the 9/11 Commission report, Omissions and Distortions. He will be referring to that research work today in his testimony on inadequacies of the 9/11 Commission's report. Professor Griffin will speak and respond to questions from our panelists until 2:30. Please welcome Professor David Ray Griffin.
Thank you very much. I confused the title of this event with my lecture for Sunday, and so I do not speak about the topic you have in your program. I'm instead speaking on anomalies in the 9/11 Commission report. But the title makes no difference. I would have said the same thing. In this presentation, I will speak of anomalies in the 9/11 Commission report. By anomalies, I mean features about and in this report that would not be expected on the assumption that the official account of 9/11 is true and the Commission was a truth-seeking body. I will first speak of background to and facts about the 9/11 Commission. I will then, in the second part of my presentation, speak of anomalous omissions in the 9/11 Commission report. After the 9/11 attacks, one might have expected the U.S. Senate to have had an investigation or hearings analogous to the Senate's Watergate hearings to determine who was responsible for the attacks. But the Senate Majority Leader, Tom Daschle, acquiesced to an appeal by President Bush and Vice President Cheney that only the House and Senate Intelligence Committees look into the potential breakdowns among federal agencies that could have allowed the terrorist attacks to occur, rather than a broader inquiry that some leaders have proposed. Bush and Cheney made this request, they said, because a broader inquiry would take sources and personnel away from the war on terror. So the resulting joint inquiry, authorized in February 2002, did not inquire as to who was responsible for the attacks, but simply presupposed the truth of the claims made by the Bush-Cheney administration. Even with this limited scope, the joint inquiry was impeded by the administration, which refused to give it access to many types of information. But the joint inquiry was not in vain. It provided enough damaging revelations to leave President Bush little choice but to support the proposed creation of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, which came to be called the 9/11 Commission. But there were continuing signs that the Bush administration did not want the truth about 9/11 to be discussed. I will cite 5 pieces of evidence. First, Bush appointed Henry Kissinger to head the 9/11 Commission, leading the New York Times to ask whether this was not a clever maneuver by the White House to contain an investigation it long opposed. When Kissinger had to resign because he refused to name his clients, Bush appointed former New Jersey Governor Thomas Kean, who had no experience with Washington and national issues, and Representative Lee Hamilton, who had previously served as a Democrat covering up a Republican crime, and who had become friends with Cheney. The Bush White House also managed to get Philip Zelikow, a close friend of Condoleezza Rice, appointed as the executive director. 3, Bush promised only $3 million for the commission, whereas Ken Starr's investigation of President Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky had cost almost $30 million. In March of 2003, the commission asked for an additional $11 million, but the Bush administration turned the request down. Eventually, the commission was given $15 million. 5, having declared that the commission must finish its work by May 2004, the Bush administration delayed authority clearances for some of the commissioners. Commissioner Max Cleland said the White House wants to run out the clock here, with the result that the commission would not begin work until the middle of 2003, leaving it with less than a year to finish its work. The Bush administration later did allow for a few more months. The most fateful of these impediments to a truth-seeking investigation proved to be the appointment of Philip Zelikow as the executive director. Here are 7 reasons. First, Zelikow was essentially a member of the Bush-Cheney administration. He had worked with Condoleezza Rice on the National Security Council in the administration of George H.W. Bush. When the Republicans were out of office during the Clinton administration, Zelikow and Rice co-authored a book. Then, after Rice was named National Security Advisor for President George W. Bush, she brought on Zelikow to help with the transition to the new National Security Council. And after that, Bush named him to the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, on which he served until he, in 2003, became the executive director of the 9/11 Commission. Second, when Rice, needing to prepare the 2002 version of the National Security Strategy of the United States, generally known as NSS 2002, and wanting something bolder than the first draft written by State Department's Richard Haass, she turned to Zelikow. The resulting document used 9/11 to justify a new doctrine of preemptive, technically preventive warfare that had long been desired by Cheney and other neoconservatives for imperial purposes. Whereas international law, as articulated in the UN Charter, said that a country cannot launch a preemptive attack on another country unless it knows that an attack from that country is imminent, too imminent for the case to be taken to the UN Security Council. NSS 2002 stated, "The United States can no longer rely on reactive posture. We must take anticipatory action to defend ourselves, even if uncertainty remains as to the time and place of the enemy's attack. To forestall or prevent hostile acts by our adversaries, the United States will, if necessary, act preemptively." This became known as the Bush Doctrine. NSS 2002 was used, as then New York Times writer Philip Sheenan stated in his 2008 book entitled The Commission, to justify a preemptive strike on Iraq. Third, from watching the Commission's public hearings, one might have assumed that the Commission was under the guidance of the commissioners, especially Kane and Hamilton. But none of the commissioners, including Kane and Hamilton, were given offices in the K Street office building used by the Commission staff. As a result, Sheenan says, most of the commissioners rarely visited K Street. Zelikow was in charge. Zelikow, more than anyone else, Sheenan says, controlled what the final report of the 9/11 Commission would say. He could exert this control because, although the first draft of each chapter was written by one of the investigative teams, Zelikow headed up a team in the front office that revised these drafts. Indeed, Sheenan says, Zelikow rewrote virtually everything that was handed to him, usually top to bottom. The 9/11 Commission's report could therefore be called the Zelikow Report. Fourth, insofar as the Commission was investigating the White House, the Commission was the White House investigating itself. Under Zelikow's guidance, the Commission simply assumed the truth of the Bush administration's account of 9/11, according to which the attacks were carried out by al-Qaeda terrorists. For example, when Zelikow divided the 80-some staff members into teams, the subject of al-Qaeda was assigned to Staff Team 1, explained Kane and Hamilton in their 2006 book, giving the inside story of the Commission. And Team 1A was told to tell the story of al-Qaeda's most successful operation, the 9/11 attacks. Fifth, I stress that because Kane and Hamilton in their book said we, unlike conspiracy theorists, don't begin with a theory and then go look for facts to support it. We start with the facts. Fifth, before the staff even had its first meeting, Zelikow had written, along with his former professor, Ernest May, a detailed outline of the Commission's report, complete, as Sheenan put it, with chapter headings, subheadings, and sub-subheadings. When Kane and Hamilton were later shown this outline, they worried that it would be seen as evidence that the report's outcome had been predetermined. So the three of them decided to keep it a secret from the rest of the staff. When the staff did finally learn about this outline a year later, they were alarmed. Some of them circulated a parody entitled The Warren Commission Report Preemptive Outline. One of its chapter headings read, "Single bullet, we haven't seen the evidence yet, but really, we're sure." The implication was that the crucial chapter in the Zelikow-May outline could have been headed Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, we haven't seen the evidence yet, but really, we're sure. Sixth, The Family Steering Committee, composed of 9/11 widows who had pressed for the creation of the 9/11 Commission, had by March 2004 learned many of the facts about Zelikow and declared, "It is apparent that Dr. Zelikow should never have been permitted to be Executive Staff Director of the Commission. The Family Steering Committee is calling for Dr. Zelikow's immediate resignation and the Commission to apologize to the 9/11 families and America for this massive appearance of impropriety." But Kane and Hamilton, as they had earlier, refused to dismiss Zelikow. Seventh, Sheenan revealed one more reason why Zelikow would not have been chosen for a 9/11 commission seeking the truth. Although Zelikow promised that he would put his relationship with senior Bush administration officials on hold until after the 9/11 Commission's report had been completed, he continued secretly to have conversations not only with his good friend Condoleezza Rice, but also with Karl Rove, who had been central to the appointment of Kissinger and Kane, and who was, in general, the White House's quarterback for dealing with that commission. As the commission's hearings were ending in May of 2004, an Associated Press story reported that victims' families are now furious at the September 11th Commission for what they see as a failure to thoroughly investigate the disaster. In October of that year, a story in Harper's Magazine was entitled "Whitewash as Public Service: How the 9/11 Commission Report Defrauds the Nation." The author, Benjamin DeMott, called the 9/11 Commission a cheat and a fraud, adding that the Commission stands as a series of evasive maneuvers that infantilize the audience, transform candor into iniquity, and conceal realities that demand immediate inspection and confrontation. A 2006 documentary film, 9/11: Press for Truth, dealt with 9/11 family members who had worked with the commission. One of them, Monica Gabriella, said, "What we're left with after our journey are no answers. I've wasted 4 years of my life." Another family member, Bob McIlvaine, said, "I'm so pissed off at this government because of this cover-up." Part 2, Anomalous Omissions. In 2004, an open letter signed by 25 individuals who have worked within various government agencies responsible for national security and public safety was sent to the U.S. Congress. This letter said, "Omission is one of the major flaws in the Commission's report. We are aware of significant issues and cases that were duly reported to the Commission by those of us with direct knowledge, but somehow escaped attention. Serious problems and shortcomings within government agencies likewise were reported to the Commission, but were not included in the report." Unquote. As that letter by professionals said, omission is one of the major flaws in the Commission's report. Indeed, in my 2005 book, The 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions, I identified over 100 significant omissions in the report, and in the meantime, I had become aware of dozens more. In this second part of my presentation, I will name for illustrative purposes a few of the anomalous omissions in the 9/11 Commission report, omissions that would not have been present in a report headed by a truth-seeking executive director. In their preface to the 9/11 Commission report, Kane and Hamilton said that the Commission sought to provide the fullest possible account of the events surrounding 9/11. In truth, the report provided was a fairly complete report of all the events surrounding 9/11 that could be used to support the official account of the 9/11 attacks. The report simply ignored all the events surrounding 9/11 that have been cited as evidence for the alternative account of 9/11, according to which the attacks of 9/11 were able to succeed only because they were facilitated by the Bush administration and its agencies, especially the Pentagon. For illustrative purposes, I will now discuss 12 facts that were omitted by the Zelikow report. 1. The alleged hijackers. Evidence that some of the alleged hijackers, including Walid al-Shiri, said to have been on American Flight 11, which supposedly struck the World Trade Center's North Tower, were still alive after 9/11. The Associated Press reported that al-Shiri spoke on September 22nd to the U.S. Embassy in Morocco, explaining that he lived in Casablanca, working as a pilot for Royal Air Morocco. Defenders of the official account would later claim that this was a case of mistaken identity. But a 2001 BBC article entitled "Hijacked Suspect Alive in Morocco" made clear that the man of that name identified by the FBI as one of the hijackers was still alive. His photograph was released by the FBI and has been shown in newspapers and on television around the world. That same Mr. al-Shiri has turned up in Morocco, proving clearly that he was not a member of the suicide attack. He told Saudi journalists in Casablanca that he has now been investigated by the American authorities, who apologize for the misunderstanding. Nevertheless, the 9/11 Commission, writing as if none of this discussion occurred, endorsed the FBI's inclusion of al-Shiri with his photograph on the list of hijackers. The commission even said that al-Shiri was probably responsible for stabbing one of the flight attendants on American 11. 2. The Atta to Portland story. The first page of the 9/11 Commission report says, among the air travelers on September 11 were Mohammed Atta and Abdul Aziz al-Omari, who arrived at the airport in Portland, Maine. Atta and Omari boarded a 6 a.m. flight from Portland to Boston's Logan International Airport. This story raises puzzling questions. Why was Atta in Portland the morning of the attacks? Atta was not only purportedly the ringleader of the hijackers, but also the one assigned to be the pilot for American 11 after it was taken over. If the commuter flight had been delayed for an hour, as my flight was yesterday, he would have been too late to make the connection to American 11, just as I missed my connection yesterday. Why would he have taken such a risk? Both the 9/11 Commission and the FBI admitted that they had no answer to this question. According to the official story, in any case, Atta was already in Boston on September 11th, but then took a rental car, a Nissan Altima, to South Portland, stayed overnight at the Comfort Inn, and then got to the jetport in time to catch the 6 a.m. flight to Boston. Although Atta caught the American 11 flight, his luggage did not make it. And after the attack on the North Tower, his luggage at the Boston airport was opened, which contained much evidence, including Atta's will, that seemed to prove that the attacks had been carried out by Al-Qaeda, at least if one did not ask why Atta would have taken his will on a plane that he planned to crash into the World Trade Center. The 9/11 Commission, in any case, reported this Atta to Portland story as if it had been told about Atta from the beginning. Actually, however, the original story was that two other alleged hijackers, Adna Bukhari and Amir Bukhari, drove the rented Nissan to Portland, stayed overnight, and then flew back to Portland to Boston the next morning in time to board American 11. Muhammad Atta, like a sensible fellow, stayed in Boston and left a rented Mitsubishi at Boston's Logan Airport. According to this original story, the authorities had found the materials that incriminated Atta and hence Al-Qaeda in this Mitsubishi, not inside Logan Airport. But on September 13th, CNN reported that neither of the Bukharis could have died on 9/11. Amir Bukhari had died the previous year, and Adnan Bukhari was still alive. As a result, authorities, with the help of the press, started changing the story. The full transition to what is now told as the official story did not emerge until September 16th. But the 9/11 Commission report did not contain any hint that the story about Atta flying from Portland to Boston, which is in the first page of its report, was a story that had undergone major alterations during the week after September 11th. 3. Stories in the mainstream press, including Newsweek and the San Francisco Chronicle, had reported that Muhammad Atta had engaged in behavior that undermined the portrayal of him as a devout Muslim, behavior such as gambling, drinking alcohol, and enjoying lap dances. These reports were even pointed out in a Wall Street Journal editorial entitled Terrorist Stag Parties, which said several of the hijackers, including reputed ringleader Muhammad Atta, spent $200 to $300 each on lap dances in the Pink Pony Strip Club. Moreover, investigative reporter Daniel Hopsicker reported that while Atta was in Florida, he used cocaine and lived with a stripper. The 9/11 Commission report, however, does not mention any of these reports. It instead portrays Atta as not only religious, but even fanatically so. According to Professor Dietmar Makuli of Hamburg, who had been Atta's thesis advisor supervisor in the 1990s, Atta's full name, like his father's, was Muhammad al-Amir Atta. And this young man was actually very religious. So much so that he prayed regularly, never touched alcohol, and would not even shake hands with a woman upon being introduced. Professor Makuli said, "I would put my hand on the fire that this Muhammad al-Amir I know will never taste or touch alcohol." The Muhammad al-Amir Atta that the professor knew was also described by him as very small, being 1.62 meters in height, which means slightly under 5'4", whereas the American Atta has been described as 5'8" and even 5'10". The 9/11 Commission never raised the possibility that the alcohol-drinking, cocaine-taking, lap dancer-paying man going as Muhammad Atta was a different man than the devout Muslim student in Hamburg. 4. With regard to the official account of the Twin Towers, the Commission ignored all of the problems, such as how fire could have caused steel-frame buildings to have collapsed, especially straight down, totally, and in virtual freefall, and also how ordinary building fires, even if ignited by jet fuel, could have caused steel to melt. But the most anomalous admission about the World Trade Center was the fact that the Commission did not even mention the fact that World Trade Center 7, which was not hit by a plane, also came down totally. Amazingly, at least for anyone who assumed that Kane and Hamilton rather than Zelikow was responsible for the 9/11 Commission report, Hamilton evidently did not even know that his report did not mention World Trade Center 7. This fact was revealed in an interview of Hamilton by Evan Solomon of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which went like this. Solomon: Why didn't the commission deal with the collapse of Building 7, which some call the smoking gun? Hamilton: well, of course, we did deal with it. Then, after the conversation had shifted to other topics, Solomon brought it back to this, saying, I just want to clarify something that you said earlier. You said that the commission report did mention the World Trade Center 7, Building 7 in it. It did mention it, or it didn't? Hamilton: the commission reviewed the question of the Building 7 collapse. I don't know specifically if it's in the report. I don't recall that it is, but it is, Solomon, I don't think it was in the report. Hamilton: okay, then I'll accept your word for it. Solomon: there was a decision not to put it in the report? Hamilton: I do not recall that it was a specific discussion in the commission and we rejected the idea of putting Building 7 in it. I don't recall that. So I presume that the report was written without reference to Building 7 at all because all of the attention was on the trade tower buildings. 5. Minetta's testimony and Cheney's descent to the bunker. Solomon, asking when Vice President Dick Cheney went down to the protective bunker, said, there was some suggestion that the Secretary of Transportation, Norman Minetta, testified in front of the commission that he in fact talked to Dick Cheney at 9:20 a.m. That was eventually omitted from the final report. Can you tell us a bit about what Secretary of Transportation Minetta told the commission about where Dick Cheney was prior to 10 a.m.? Hamilton replied, I do not recall. When Solomon started to ask a follow-up question, Hamilton said, well, we think that Vice President Cheney entered the bunker shortly before 10 o'clock. In saying this, Cheney was, of course, saying what the 9/11 Commission report said. Later in the interview, Hamilton said, I do not know at this point of any factual error in our report. And he had here been confronted with what is one of the most obvious and important falsehoods in the 9/11 Commission report, the claim that Cheney, having not entered the bunker until almost 10 o'clock, did not have any conversation with the young man reported by Minetta. In my book-length critique of this report, I filled 4 pages with evidence highlighted by Minetta's testimony that the commission's claim that Cheney did not reach the bunker until shortly before 10 a.m. was a lie. And yet Hamilton could not recall Minetta's testimony, even though Hamilton had been the one questioning Minetta during the 9/11 Commission hearings and had begun his questioning by saying to Minetta, you were there in the bunker for a good part of the day. I think you were there with the Vice President. But Hamilton did not want to deal with that question while being interviewed by Solomon. He wanted simply to repeat the official story, in which there is no room for Minetta's memory about Cheney's presence from about 9:20 on. 6, the importance of the omission of Minetta's testimony. The omission of Norman Minetta's testimony about Cheney and the young man is important because it revealed that Cheney and others in the underground shelter, technically known as the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, were aware by 9:26 that an aircraft was approaching the Pentagon. 7, the conflict between Cheney and Clark. Richard Clark states that he received authority for fighters to shoot down any unknown non-military planes by 9:50, whereas the 9/11 Commission report claims that Vice President Cheney did not give the shoot-down authorization until after 10:10, several minutes after Flight 93 had crashed. 8. The 9/11 Commission also omitted the fact that the project for the New American Century, many members of which had become key members in the Bush administration, published a document in late 2000 saying that a new Pearl Harbor would aid PNAC's goal of obtaining funding for a rapid technological transformation of the U.S. military. 9. The Commission also omitted the fact that UNICAL had declared that the Taliban could not provide adequate security for it to go ahead with its oil and gas pipeline from the Caspian region through Afghanistan and Pakistan. It also omitted a report that at a meeting in July 2001, U.S. representatives said that because the Taliban refused to agree to a U.S. proposal that would allow the pipeline project to go forward, a war against them would begin by October. 10. The report headed by Zelikow, who had written NSA 2002, providing justification for attacking Iraq, omitted the fact that some key members of the Bush administration, including Donald Rumsfeld and his deputy Paul Wolfowitz, had been agitating for a war with Iraq for many years. It also omitted the notes of Rumsfeld's conversations on 9/11 showing that he was determined to use the attacks as a pretext for a war with Iraq. 11. The Commission endorsed the claim of Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, that he was in his office talking with a CIA briefer during the 9/11 attacks until the Pentagon was hit. But the Commission failed to point out the contradictory account of counterterrorism coordinator Richard Clark, who said that Rumsfeld was in the Pentagon's video conference center participating in Clark's video conference. In fact, this is one of the most amazing things. Clark's book came out while the 9/11 Commission hearings were going. It became a national bestseller. Clark's book is never mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report. One reason is just he and Zelikow hate each other. But the other reason is Clark's book contradicted so many things that ended up in the 9/11 Commission. Clark had written his book, long before he had probably seen any galleys of the 9/11 Commission report. So he evidently, in all innocence, was saying, of course, with Clark, you never know anything is innocent, but no sign that he was deliberately trying to refute the 9/11 Commission because it hadn't issued its report yet. And yet there are all these contradictions between what he says happened and what Zelikow, i.e. the 9/11 Commission, say happened. Finally, 12. The Commission also endorsed the claim of General Richard Myers, the acting chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that he was on Capitol Hill during the attacks that morning. But the Commission failed to point out that the contradictory account by counterterrorism coordinator Richard Clark, according to whom Myers was in the Pentagon participating in Clark's video conference. Rather dramatic contradictions. Conclusions. The points in the first part of this paper provide reasons to suspect the 9/11 Commission report to be untrustworthy. The points in the second part provide illustrations of the fact that this Zelikow report is indeed untrustworthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Griffin. We will now invite the panelists to pose their questions to Professor Griffin and to engage in discussion with him.
I think I will sit down if this doesn't cause any problems with the videos. For those of you who don't know, I just almost died last
Pronto?
year, so I'm not
Pronto.
completely well yet. Good to see you. Thank you.
Can
Yeah,
I-
maybe pull this
can I
away
say-
too.
Judge Busamato will pose the first question.
Pronto? Thank you very much, Mr. Griffin. And do you know that according to the Senate Committee on Intelligence, the CIA analysts have been subjected to terrible pressure, but the committee does not indicate the source of this pressure. I ask who was the responsible of this pressure according to your opinion?
The pressure?
Pressure on the CIA, the Senate.
Pressure on the CIA from, that's what you're asking. Pressure to do what?
The pressure in order to avoid that CIA could cooperate with the Senate Commission. This is what it is possible. It is a lie, a big lie. One of the lie that you speak, implicit or explicit lie. Well, this is one of the. But there is another question. Do you think that the prove the relationship between the Bush and the Bin Laden families could have had a negative effect on impartiality, independence, and effectiveness of the inquiry of September 11? So the second. The third one.
Maybe we better take them one at one. I can't remember everything. So the first one was the source of possible pressure on the CIA. Generally, that goes in the other direction. I don't know of the CIA being pressure. Of course, we must distinguish between the two sides of the CIA, the investigative part and the other part. And yes, with the investigative part, big pressure was put on the CIA to lie.
To hidden the truth. Pressure to hidden to cover the truth.
Yes, I think the best source of that is probably Ray McGovern, who of course used to be the CIA briefer to the president. He was the briefer for 3 presidents, and he is extremely angry, mild word, with the CIA for this modification, because as he saw the CIA in the days that he worked with it, again, on the investigative side, not the covert side, he believed it was generally an honorable organization and generally tried to get the best evidence available to the president. But with Bush and Tenet, things changed radically in McGovern's view. And the evidence seems to support that to me.
After, I can wait for...
Well, take your second question, since
Yes.
you did raise it.
Now, there is another question. I ask if there are some evidences about the connection between Mahmoud Ahmed, the chief of ISI Pakistan, Ahmad Omar Saed and Atta, and if Saed sent $100,000 to Atta on the June 2000 on charge of Mahmoud. I ask if this scandal regarding Mahmoud Ahmed, who was in contact with the CIA at State Department during the time between 4 September until 12 September, has been covered by Bush administration. This scandal.
You
of
say
contact.
has he admitted? Has anybody in the administration admit to that?
No, there are two questions.
Uh-huh.
One concerns the possibility that Mr. Saed sent Mohamed Atta
Yeah.
$100,000.
Yeah, that's been
on
pretty-
charge of this question. Chossudowski is
This has been pretty widely reported, even in the mainstream press, and but not reported by the 9/11 Commission, which said they found no evidence whatsoever that any alien government had any influence on the so-called hijackers.
okay.
So the 9/11 Commission report, Zelikow just felt free to deny virtually anything that was really provable, and he just tells the story, and that becomes the official story then.
No, the scandal is this one. It's possible that the White House did not spoke about this problem of Mahmoud resigning, because on 8 October 8, the Mahmoud has resigned without speaking with but the question is that according my experience, if is true this fact that has been said by Michel Chossudowski, there is a participation to the September 11 massacre, because this is aid to Mohamed Atta. This is very important question. And you have told that there are a lot of persons that which who are not being incriminated and indicted. These persons are two of the persons that should be indicted by the prosecutor in the United States, and nothing happened.
Yes, there was pretty good evidence that it was probably came partly from Chossudowski, who had done so much good work on this, that the Bush administration silently put pressure on the Pakistanis to fire him.
But only after Indian Secret Service denounced this scandal.
That's right.
After Indian Secret Service and Times Indian denounced this scandal, not before.
That's right.
It was obliged to do it.
That seems to be the case. Yes.
So,
Thank you.
thank you.
A question from Professor Johnson.
Pardon my laryngitis today. I'll try to speak up. The Mineta testimony is, I think, very, very important and central to solving some of these questions surrounding Cheney's activities. Has the young naval officer who was present at that time ever been identified, or do we know who he was? And if we had the name, would there be any way to get some better information than we have had up to date?
Yeah. Evidently, it has not become public knowledge. This is one issue that Ray McGovern was most interested in, and could not find out an answer to that. So if you're a Ray McGovern and can't find an answer, you probably can't find out an answer. At first, people were saying that they suspected he was a military man, but somebody, maybe it was Mineta in that later testimony in Seattle, I'm not sure, But somebody said no, it was somebody in not in military. So that probably meant it more likely was a Secret Service man, which would have made sense.
A question from Professor Lee.
Yes, Dr. Griffin, I'm interested in the criteria that you use for the 12 that you've picked. I'm sure you could think of 12 others that were equally interesting. I just want to try my luck on one. It seemed like one of the glaring anomalies was the treatment of Hani Hanjour as the putative pilot of Flight 77 into the Pentagon, and how it was a very fluid, changing story. He was a good pilot, he was a terrible pilot. He was a good pilot, he was a terrible pilot. And what do you make of that?
Here the criterion for inclusion was that I didn't want to repeat what I'm going to say on my Sunday. So I will be talking about him in my presentation on the Flight 77. If all questions were that easy.
Do we have some difficult questions from the panel? Yes, Professor Johnson.
Dr. Griffin, we are in your debt for all your great work on this topic. And you've written many books. Why does the mainstream media not review your books?
Wouldn't I like to know? I have my personal conspiracy theory about this. I believe they don't want the general public to read these books. And if they review them, even in a very negative review, they notify, the New York Times would notify millions of people. I could get the worst review in the world, and my Amazon.com ratings would go off the charts, But no, there's not been a single mainstream, meaning corporate press review of any of my 10 books, even the one would think that if you were named Pick of the Week by a very prestigious organization, somebody help me with the name. Publishers Weekly. Very reputable organization. And each week they review quite a number of books. And some of those books they star. And then each week one of the starred reviews gets lifted up as Pick of the Week. So there are only 51 books a year that are picks of the week. So you would think that would be worthy of a book review, particularly on a very subject like this, and particularly by somebody who was considered a fairly respectable philosopher of religion and theologian. You would think that wouldn't that be interesting? Here's a theologian writing about 9/11. Boy, wouldn't that? So that refutes a lot of people's view of the press, which is they will do anything to sell papers. That's not true. The press will not endorse views that were talked about in the previous talk. Any of those talks are not talked about because they're verboten. So that I believe that's reason. But everybody knows I'm a conspiracy theorist, so you can just discount my theory.
Yes, Professor Lee, another question.
Dr. Griffin, here's one that was I'm curious about. Have any of the so-called hijackers ever been interviewed by anyone recently? I know they were interviewed back in the day, but recently.
We just lost track of them. I sort of doubt that the world lost track of them. In other words, I suspect they're dead now. But again, I don't know. That would be so many people have been killed. Those would be obvious choices. But one of our guys was going to go over to Morocco and try to find him and check it out. And then that didn't work out. If anybody's got a few $1,000s, we could probably get that trip underway. So I just don't know. But some people say that that we're claiming that so-called 9/11 hijackers, we put on the so-called, they say 9/11 hijackers, were still alive. We don't necessarily say that because we don't know. We say that we have very strong evidence that some of them were still alive after 9/11. But I think that's as far as we can go. You'll have a presentation on this by Jay Kolar. Is that tomorrow?
Yes, that's tomorrow morning.
Yeah, he's the real expert on this, so he will know. In fact, if I had known that, speaking of criteria, if I had known that I hadn't noticed that Jay was speaking, I would not have used those illustrations. I would have used some other ones. But as you say, I have lots. I have 115 that were in my book.
Professor Jenkins.
Dr. Griffin, your overwhelming evidence that the 9/11 Commission was not a truth-seeking commission raises a question in my mind: where in American society could we expect to establish, to organize, to institute the kind of commission of investigation which would serve our interest in the truth about 9/11?
That's why we're in Canada. No, I've been saying this for many years now that it's either it's going to be in Canada or in Europe or in Japan. That those or Australia. We have various possibilities for a real investigation or a real, whatever you want to put what term you want to put on it. But I think it would be not quite impossible, but virtually impossible in the United States. We probably wouldn't even be able to rent a building. What happened with the mosque, same thing would probably happen to us. Terrorist sympathizers, can't have them in our building. So, but I still believe that it's possible, and I see these hearings as a first step in such a process. So that's why after all these years and 10 books later, I'm not giving up.
Wouldn't a foreign venue for such a commission be seen as a hostile act by the United States? And
who cares?
No, but the reason to care is that the United States government is in possession of a great deal of the information and constitutes the witnesses which would need to be brought in front of such a commission in order to make progress in understanding what really happened.
Yeah, it's there are two parts to that. I would say what you just said, like with the Pentagon, the allusion to that we know they admit they have roughly 85 cameras that were focused on the Pentagon. They will not release any of the photos. They say that one of those was one of the 85. They say was one of those. So dozens of examples like that would be the case. But secondly, and the way I thought you were going with that, the American government has so much on other people, on other governments, and still, in spite of its weakened state, it still has a lot of clout in the financially, and so I think there would be real difficulties. But I say, in spite of the stonewalling and the fact that you can't even get Hamilton or Kane to do an interview with any of us, would not have come to this meeting, was mentioned. Nobody from NIST would come. They were offered an all-expenses-paid trip to South Carolina, I believe, a few years ago. Even the semi-official report, the popular mechanics book, can be considered quasi-official. By the way, in the paper by the authors of the book that I wrote, I wrote a book on about
Debunking.
No, the latest book before this one.
Mysterious collapse?
Cognitive infiltration. What's the
Kasunstein.
Kasunstein? They admitted in there that they regarded the popular mechanics book as authorized in a sense by the government. That was in the first draft. It got out, of course, in the final draft. So that's why we can call it a quasi-official report. Those guys would not even come to their all-expenses-paid trip to South Carolina. So they will not. And originally they were doing some radio shows. They got beat up so badly in one that they quit. They did so poorly. They just quit doing interviews of any kind anymore with anybody who knew anything. In other words, anybody from the 9/11 Commission. So that's the situation we're in, that nobody will even admit. The only way that Hamilton gave that report is he got blindsided. He didn't know. He just thought he was being interviewed by an ordinary, know-nothing TV personality. Well, as those of you who read my book know, I call it my ersatz interview with Hamilton. I had fed Solomon the questions. And he took he took my whole list of questions. And somewhere, at some point, Hamilton got pretty frustrated and says, well, somebody's gone through here with a fine-tooth comb. Well, he was right. So that's the only way that he subjected himself to that interview. He didn't know he was getting into. So that I stand with the point that none of them will do an interview with anybody on the 9/11 Commission.
Is it correct to say that we really do not have a model of the kind of investigative commission we're looking for? There is no model?
Well, I think what's going on here is a good first step of what needs to be done. This is, in a sense, analogous to the early stages of the Senate hearings, where a lot of facts were reported. Of course, the situation is entirely different. You don't have somebody, a Richard Nixon, in position of losing his job and so on. But that isn't something that I'm an expert on. So I've mainly just focused on trying to deal with the evidence against the official story, and I'll leave it up to lawyers and people who are politically wiser than I to figure out what we should do after this. But I think this is going to prove to be a very important step in the process. And if the truth ever comes out, I think these hearings we will look back and say, there's where it got going.
Are there further questions from the panel? Yes, Judge Imposimato.
Mike.
Do you think that Saudi Arabia helped the Saudi terrorists since 15 or 16 hijackers were Saudi Arabian, and that Atta's entrance visa was released by the Jeddah American consulate in Arabia Saudita? And do you know that 2 days after the September 11, two Saudian citizens, a member of real families, Saudi, and the son of Ministry of Defense left the United States territory using Learjet in violation of the law, and that Bush administration denied this fact, very important, because it is probable that these two persons were connected with Mohammed Atta, because
yeah, so many
complicate the question. No,
so many important questions tied in with that. Certainly, I wrote at some length in one of my books about the facts that I think are undeniable, that the Bush administration was involved in helping a lot of Saudis, including several bin Ladens, get out of the country, and as you say, against the law.
the law.
Illegally, yeah. Another issue is what do we think about the fact that so many of the alleged hijackers were Saudis? Many people have said, and they've used this as a rebuttal, look, if what you're saying is true, most of the hijackers would have been Iraqis, because that's what they wanted. That's what Wolfowitz and so why did they use Saudi? And I sort of quoted a version of Donald Rumsfeld. I say you don't necessarily go with the terrorist you want, you go with the terrorist you've got. and they had some people that were available to be patsies. Now, recently, there seem to be signs that they may be ready to cash in on these 15, because some of you know that from the beginning, the neocons have had a list of 7 dominantly Muslim countries that were on the hit list. And it appeared that at the beginning, the Bush administration just thought they were just going to, mow over them very, very quickly so that they would get to Iran within a couple years. Things didn't work out, but that was their plan. It's in writing. Now, they had slightly different versions of the 7, but somehow it has always come out to be 7 countries they wanted. And in some of the lists, Saudi Arabia were on the list. Now that's pretty astounding, that our best ally, for all sorts of bad reasons, except oil, was Saudi Arabia, and yet they were on the hit list. And this is public information, that the government, the Bush administration, was planning to take them out. In recent weeks, months, there have been some signs that, we've done Libya, that's on the list, that was on the list. So we've done at least 3, and of course, a couple others, things are happening there. And of course, they've wanted Iran for a long time and just, for various reasons, couldn't do that. So that may be, but who knows? Unfortunately, the change of administrations from Republicans to Democrats hasn't made any difference, except we have more assassinations now than we did before.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Are there further questions from the panelists? What we are, to my astonishment, perhaps to the astonishment of everyone here, we are running, thanks to the elegance and compression of Professor Griffin's presentation.
And also because I thought I only had an hour.
Mea culpa. Yes, Professor Johnson.
Yes, if we have a little time, so let's try to use it.
Yes.
Dr. Griffin, how do you see, or how do you hope that the true story will reveal itself, will unravel? Do you have any hope that we will have whistleblowers come forward, people who have guilty consciences, perhaps? Is there a track that we should hope for as the years roll by here?
Yeah, there are various scenarios under which something could occur. I was alluding to some sort of international investigation that would be so convincing that even the American press would have to cover it. But of course, I'm getting here in the land of fantasy. But it could be so impressive that most of the world would say, look, the official story is false. Your government did it. You no longer have credibility. You will never have credibility until you clear this up and tell the truth. I think that's conceivable, not likely, but conceivable. And that's all we can hope for, something that's possible we can work for. I think it's conceivable. After 10 years, I'm not looking forward to people with guilty consciences finally coming forward, although a fellow is working on a film that has that as the premise. So that's a possibility. Another thing I mention is in my forthcoming book, plug, I have in the last chapter a discussion of a fellow in Great Britain who was in the security realm and started studying 9/11 and 7/7, decided they're both false claim, and he lost his job, obviously, by telling what he believed to be the truth. Maybe that would provide a model. I suggest that for other people, that you can do it and life doesn't come to an end necessarily literally. So there are scenarios in which this sort of thing could happen.
I wonder if, with the permission of our panelists and Professor Griffin, we might, since we are still more than 10 minutes ahead of our schedule, open up this session to questions from the audience to Professor Griffin.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Is there any information from WikiLeaks that might help?
I don't think WikiLeaks is going to help us with 9/11. Everything I've studied thus far doesn't suggest that that's something they're interested in. But I don't know, so it's possible.
Question here, Brad?
Are you familiar with the book that was written by the famous photographer who's now in Argentina? The book was written in Spanish. I don't believe it's been translated into English, but it needs to be. Which is he was the only photographer allowed at Ground Zero. And he started out as a government employee, and he ended up, of course, discovering things he wasn't supposed to see.
Can anyone here remember his name?
I can get it by the next session. I'll have that.
I don't think it's Gordon. It's been several years, and I can't call it now. I did study that some and had a little bit of contact with him, but I think you're absolutely right. I'm glad you lift that up, that somebody needs to translate it.
Yeah, Kurt Sonnenfeld.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Kurt Sonnenfeld.
A question from this side.
Dr. Griffin, the judge started to ask a question before about a connection between bin Laden and the Bushes, and he didn't quite finish. Could you restate your question about connection between bin Laden and the Bushes, Judge?
Yes, there is the evidence that exists a relationship between Bush and the bin Laden families through the inquiring that has been done by a lot of investigating journalists and also historians. One of these is Nafez Mossadegh Ahmed, who wrote a very interesting book, is War to the Truth, and he explained in clear way that there are deep, very, very intense relationship between Bush family and bin Laden family. But bin Laden family is well connected with his family. It is not true that the family of bin Laden is against bin Laden. They are unit. They are very connected. And so the problem is that if Bush appoint the president of commission with Thomas Keane, who is in conflict of interest because of the relationship with the two societies who are connected with the bin Laden families, we have a series of conflict of interest in this investigation, because we have the impossibility to have an impartial and effective inquiry, because of the Thomas Keane. I think I can ask to Mr. is the president of on September 11 Commission. Thomas Keane is the president, you know.
He was the chairman.
The chairman.
Yeah.
And he was connected with the other two societies. He was inside the society of oil, and he was in relationship with two families that were connected with Al Qaeda. And now it is difficult to explain. The next time that we speak, I can explain you. This connection is very precise. So I saw the difficulty to make an independent and impartial, and so the Mr. Griffin, Professor Griffin, has told that they was the committee, the commission has told a lot of lies because of this, and not only they told lies, but they covered a lot of problem. They have not analyzed a lot of problems. So I think that we cannot hope to get the truth by the United States inquiring. We have to make pressure for international commission, independent, and perhaps also to go to the Supreme Court International Criminal International, because they are competent. They have competence for the crime against humanity. It is even if the United States has not signed the convention, there is no problem, because also Gaddafi has not signed, and there is a international warrant of arrest against Gaddafi. You know, I think that this is a chosen that we can evaluate it.
Yes.
That's a good statement. I don't need to add anything to that.
You have a question?
Yeah, I have a point of information vis-a-vis WikiLeaks. I don't know if you're aware, but within 2 weeks after the story broke a year ago, he was quoted in the European press, Julian Assange, saying, "I'm into real conspiracies, not the September 11th conspiracy."
Right.
That could be either he's got information, that's his get out of jail card, and he's letting the government know that he has it, or it's a limited hangout. He might have information.
Good point.
Another question here?
Hi, most of us in the room here have been involved in the 9/11 Truth Movement for a long time, and we've done a lot of research. The first step in anyone's movement from the official story, which is a very simple black and white, good guys, bad guys, you're with us, you're with the terrorist story, that anybody can embrace and be comfortable with and go home and sleep at night. Once a person confronts the truth of what really happened on 9/11, the first thing that they have to deal with is extremely disturbing. It upsets your worldview, and it gives you a completely different perspective on the American government or the powers to be. And my concern here is always the same. How do we bridge the gap? We have the information. We have these hearings are going to bring up endless amounts of verifiable, documented evidence to direct one to an inside job. How do we bridge the gap to the general public? And I'm not talking about mainstream media here. I'm just talking about the average person on the street that you talk to help them make that leap of faith to disturb their worldview and take that upsetting information and bring it on board and then do something about it. That's my concern, and I ask you the same. I'd like to ask all the people here that question. Thank you.
Let me take this opportunity to ask the two moderators to respond to this easy question.
I would have thought it was a question that had something to do with the theology of conversion, but but yes, Barbara Honecker.
Yes, David, I would like to know, and if you already know, everyone should know, that I just read in the paper, I think yesterday or day before, that Zellico, there's a new published version for the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 commission report with a new introduction by Zellico. So I'm looking forward, David, to your rebuttal to that in your next book.
I'm sure he quoted me.
And just one other thing, you may know about this, but there is a new book by Ali Stefan, who, if I'm not incorrect, was he was the person who tried something like 70 times to get his FBI headquarters to approve releasing information about Moussaoui. And he's just written a book called Black Banners. So I have not read it yet, but I think it will be revealing because Sybil Edmonds, I believe, took him into the commission and they censored everything he said. He's now written a book.
Okay.
What's his name?
Oh, I'm sorry, David.
Ali Soufan, Alisoufan.
No, actually, I was serious a minute ago. I did want maybe you or Matt maybe to speak to that question. Unless you think as moderators you should not.
No, I
respond.
think that it's a question about the presentation of evidence in a coherent and persuasive and rigorous and methodologically rigorous form. And I believe that what we're hearing from our witnesses is a very interesting and strong step in that direction. I think we've had already a very rigorous and stimulating presentation on the subject of state crimes against democracy as a conceptual framework. And I was intrigued to notice that term figures in the subtitle of David's new book. So that would be my very brief answer, but Matthew perhaps has something else.
I'm not going to gainsay anything that's been presented by the witnesses, but I want to fully respect and honor this gentleman's question. If science were sufficient for our purposes, we would not be here. So science will not be sufficient, it would seem, to address this matter of a kind of conversion, theological or otherwise. Underneath the very clever quip Michael makes is a profound point. I think we are at a very important sort of liminal space here of glimpsing the beginnings of ideologies, glimpsing the beginnings of worldviews, and how they take shape, and the time at which the opening, the space available to us to make sure that glimpse is not shut down, clamped down by the powerful hand of orthodoxy, is something I think all of us here are witness to over these hearings. I think if I say more, I fully step out of my role as moderator, but the gentleman's point is well taken, that we all have such a very, very clear stake in this, that summons from us something Old Testament-like in witness, not to privilege any particular perspective. All outlooks that have that are reputable at all theologically have some claim upon witness. This is what I take your question to beg.
I'd like to add to that too. Lance made this statement this morning that the basic reason seems to be people just say they wouldn't do that, and that's what I've argued in my recent book. I have a chapter that's talking about the faith and the American faith as really the faith in this a nationalist faith, and that for the most part Americans were inculcated into this, that this is the finest nation on the face of the earth, and all that stuff, so many people just it doesn't matter how many facts you give them, they just wouldn't do it. And I have a chapter in my book about Bill Moyers. Here we've got probably certainly one of our best journalists, and yet he will not look at the evidence. He just believes they wouldn't do it.
I regret to say that we do want to stick to our timetable. There will be what we've had in the last 2 minutes is a kind of advance glimpse of the kinds of vigorous exchanges and informative exchanges that will occur in our audience question and answer period, which will be the concluding session this afternoon. I would like to thank Professor Griffin for his testimony.